Okay, Arthur Hayes, GM, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome to get you on. Let's just start this way. You are a true OG in this space. It's been years and years that you have watched all this stuff play out. So, right now, as we talk, April 2023, how do you feel about the crypto space? Are you more bullish than you've ever been? Are you frustrated by what you see, like regulation wise? What's your 40-foot view?
So I think as I published in my recent essay, Kaiseki, and I think the one before that, I forgot the name, I am extremely bullish about the prospects of crypto. The unfortunate fact is that that bullishness is predicated on essentially a disintegration of the global financial system that we sort of had since the 1970s after Bretton Woods was ended, when the dollar came off of gold. However, from a crypto perspective, this is our time to shine. If we can't demonstrate value to people of an alternate financial system that isn't plagued by, is my bank going to be taken over by the government or not? Are my deposits safe or not? Is my central bank going to print money to save my deposit or not? And the questions we ask ourselves is, okay, well, is SHA-256 going to, withstand quantum computing, or, is the Bitcoin network paying enough for security so that miners can continue to validate blocks? These are the sorts of questions that we're asking ourselves, which are a different sort of questions. It doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin is going to be around forever, but I think it's a welcome change from the political banking issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis with this system that, you know, did well for when it was the new thing a few hundred years ago, but now we have computers and cryptography, and it's time to have a different system out there.
When you reference the banking system, and obviously most recently we saw what happened with SVB and Signature and all that stuff, but if we rewind a couple more years, it seems like the pandemic was just a huge accelerant for crypto kind of going mainstream, and we had all the institutions rush in. Did you kind of, well, I know you watched it closely, but do you feel like we wouldn't be where we are necessarily in the industry if we didn't have what happened with COVID?
I think that COVID was unfortunate and it accelerated a lot of trends, but there would have been something to get us to that point anyway, right? So the reaction of let's shut down the world economy because some people are dying, that was only possible because we have this, the internet, Zoom, WeChat, all these sort of these services, right? So this was something that was going to always happen. Some people were saying that by the end of 2019, the global economy was probably going to be in a recession anyways. Would it have been as drastic as would happen when the global leaders decided to shut down the world for a few years? Who knows? However, it wasn't as if the global economy was on such a strong footing that it would have avoided a recession. So yes, it accelerated a lot of things. And every 100 years or so, we have a global pandemic. So this isn't a new thing in terms of human civilization. And if you look back, especially, I read a book during COVID about the Black Death, which started in sort of the 14th century, in some of the Italian city-state colonies who received ships of people who were sick, and then it sort of spread throughout Europe, and a third to 50% of the population died, and it sort of accelerated the trend of people moving from the farm into the city, labor gaining purchasing power and negotiating power against the feudal capitalists of the time. And so we saw a similar sort of thing. We have the analog businesses that couldn't survive when everybody was at home and participating in a fully digital economy. And obviously that created strains in the analog banking system, and the precursors of the current bank failures in 2023 was the policy response to COVID in 2020. We wouldn't have had the same issues if it wasn't for the response to a pandemic in essentially the United States and Western Europe. So it's all interrelated, but pandemics always accelerate changes that were going to happen anyways, just much quicker.
It's very guns, germs, and steel. Like Jared Diamond's whole idea that, global pandemics can be an impetus or a catalyst for change and, big societal movements. So I wanted to switch to talk a little bit more about your essays. I have to admit, Dan and I are fans, writers
Thank you.
recognizing writers. But you're certainly not the only person who puts these up at the top of your essays or anything you say about the market. But, you have to put out these big disclaimers to say, this is not financial advice and don't trade or invest based on anything I say here. So, Dan and I know that we're writing for like a news consuming audience, but I want to know, when you first started this and now as you're continuing to write these essays, who's the audience you have in mind? Who do you want reading this, and like, who are you doing this for? Or is this really just, you're writing for yourself and you're putting it out there for whoever picks it up?
So, I mean, the first thing is I obviously trade my own money and I love financial markets. And so if you're not able to express an idea clearly and logically, then your investment thesis is probably has holes in it, and those holes will result in losses. And writing these essays is kind of cathartic. So I have an idea, I have a position. Can I explain my idea in a way that somebody can understand? Can they can walk through my thinking that, okay, that makes sense or that doesn't make sense? Can I defend my idea against the internet, right? So if you publish dog shit and you open yourself up to public comment, people are going to comment, and you're going to find out if you were, off or on track from the general consensus, which is very good because, again, I'm trading global macro. Global macro is essentially, what does humanity think about these asset classes? And so if you're not able to put forth a thesis, defend it, and it make any sense, then your portfolio doesn't make sense either. So I do that from a personal standpoint. And then from a educational standpoint, if we want crypto to be another financial system, then people need to really understand what we're trying to replace or improve upon. And the unfortunate fact is a lot of people don't receive any sort of education about how money works, how the banking system works, how asset markets really function. And if you really want to get good analysis, it's extremely expensive. So I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on research. I don't like traditional news media. It's basically just propaganda for whoever the political class is in power and whichever respective jurisdiction you're in. It's all trash, in my opinion. Just read the headline. You'll probably get all you need to know about a particular issue. But that's the news that most people consume. They want it free. They want it fast. They don't want to sit down and read something for half an hour. And so, my part of, talking my own book and hopefully helping educate people is, here's a long form piece of content. I enjoy writing these things. I enjoy learning about these particular concepts. It's a challenge to myself to express them in as little jargon as possible, such that the average person can at least become interested in it. They doesn't necessarily have to agree with what I'm saying, but they have access to this sort of research that's extremely expensive, that they otherwise would just be reading the crap that's on their Facebook feed or TikTok or whatever. So that's sort of the overarching goal with my writing.
That gets a little bit to the follow-up I was thinking of while you were talking, but so many other people who create content or put information out there for people to consume about crypto and the industry are doing it with like Twitter Spaces, Twitter Threads, YouTube channels, podcasts, case in point, present, here we are. So why don't any of those forms appeal to you? Why is it that you want to do it in long form essays? Because these are not short blog posts, I have to say.
Yeah, I think that to make things palatable on either short form social media content or even video takes away from the joy of and the creative aspect of prose and writing. And I love to read very talented authors, and I try to take what I can from the greats and incorporate it into my writing. And I think that if you're not in sort of the written form, you lose a lot of that, and you can't really go into depth. Like a 30-minute long video or an hour-long video is very hard to consume versus, okay, I'm going to sit down and read something for a half an hour. I just think that's just my own personal view. Like I find myself fidgeting when I'm, watching long podcasts. I'm speeding them up 1.5x. But if I want to sit down and read, half an hour long article or, a long book, I'm able to do that. And I think that's a testament to written prose.
People will definitely watch this whole video, Arthur. Don't worry. No one's going to skip through this. No, I like where this is going, and Stacey and I are writers, so I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I don't know if everyone out there agrees. I feel like attention spans are pretty limited these days. But it's a great segue to ask you. I know we wanted to bring up just crypto Twitter. I mean, you've become such a voice on there. Do you feel like a lot of nuance gets lost these days? And in some ways, I know you got into this in your great essay about Sam Bankman-Fried, or you could use the SVB collapse as another example of like this social media mania that happens, and it with equal speed, people are destroyed and brought down, but also built up. Like, you sort of become this Twitter Oracle. I mean, Suzhou is another example. Pick anyone you want in the industry. Like, what do you sort of make of all that? I know that you enjoy it. You know, you put out a meme where you're chewing off Sam's head, but at the same time, like there's definite drawbacks of the noise on there.
It's fun. I think it's enjoyable. It's a new means of communication. It obviously has its drawbacks, and I think I forgot, it's either Lewis or Charles Gav. It's a father and son research team called Gav Call Research, and one of their thesis is that the Twitter, social media, TikTok culture has inspired cover your ass politics, which basically means that politicians, for the first time ever, are actually held to account in a real time basis, and that leads them to very short term thinking. To okay, how do I appease my constituency today? Not really going into any depth about any particular problem. And it leads to sort of these reactionary responses. And it's not a democratic or an autocratic thing. Everyone has a social media audience in whichever jurisdiction or that they're in, and they're responsive to that, even if their particular form of government has an election every 4 years or doesn't have any elections, right? This ethos and this spirit that's on Twitter and some of these other similar platforms are accelerating decisions, which in a lot of cases are leading to poor decisions at the end of the day. And so I think that people need to understand it's, appreciate it for what it is. I think it's entertainment. It's fun to hang out with people and shit talk on Twitter. People do post very interesting content on Twitter, but again, I think that is a starting point for a conversation. That if you see something, a cool chart, or somebody said something quite intelligent, and was it 140 or 240 characters, whatever it is, that's an invitation for you to go and research more and read a book or read a longer form article to actually get the depth behind what you're reading. Otherwise, you're never going to really understand what people are saying, because again, if I'm going to say something on Twitter, I need to use jargon, and a lot of people aren't going to understand what I'm saying. But if you want to read my article, then I can explain something. And so I think if people confine themselves to just these, short form social media content vehicles, they are not really going to upgrade their learning. They're just going to hear from people who can talk exactly where they are today and not, upskill yourself.
It's a really interesting dynamic you're describing, because both with the long form, and you're kind of saying, you want to challenge yourself to put your thesis out there and just see what people think of it. And if they think it's shit, they're going to tell you. But, same thing with Twitter, really, in what you're saying is that, it kind of all gets hashed out there. Like, people are doing things thinking, if people don't like this, I'm going to hear about it immediately, like within 30 seconds. Do you think that can swing too far? I want to play devil's advocate with that, because, everyone called SVB like the bank run that like Twitter kind of kicked off, and we've seen other instances where, like, I mean, Dan and I were just chatting before this, like there's been execs that everyone, thought, and then it almost became kind of like an accepted fact that like people were dead. And then we found out that they're not, it can go too far. And I just kind of want to push back on that a little bit.
Again, it's all about context. People need to take the content form and put it in context with their overall narrative of what they're trying to do, right? If you're on Twitter to get if you're going to spend 5 minutes on Twitter and think you're going to learn anything in depth, then that's just not going to happen. On the other side, if you're a leader and you just respond to what people say on Twitter, you're not really a leader, right? You're not actually taking a longer form view. And yes, there could be some constructive criticism around the edges, but you've made your decision, you've made your path, you stick to it. And unless somebody presents something extremely compelling on a social media platform, you shouldn't be changing your mind, every time you get, a retweet or a like, right? And so I think you just have to take the medium and, incorporate it into your overall way of doing things.
I sometimes think for CEOs who are running exchanges, there's like nothing good can come of being too vocal on Twitter. I mean, I love pointing out the Alex Mashinsky tweet where he retweeted, I think it was Selkis, right, Stacey, of Masari, who had questioned Celsius, or maybe it was Mike Dudas, but one of those two. And he retweeted and was like, shame on you. We are in great shape with terrific health. And how dare you suggest? And it was like 2 days later. And it was like Celsius, the SpongeBob thing. Man, like, just why tweet that? Like,
I did want to also kind of spin that to ask what you think of the way that you've been portrayed, I guess both in mainstream media and Twitter. Do you think either form of media has been any kinder to you? Do you think there's a lot of truth in the way that people, who've never met you and may never meet you, perceive you?
I honestly don't care. Um, you get a reaction. Social media is about getting a reaction, and we know that that's how the human dopamine function works in the brain. Either you love somebody, or you hate somebody. And if you're trying to, glean self-worth from either one of those two reactions, you're probably going to be led astray in terms of your behavior, because the people who love you are going to love you regardless of what you say. The people who hate you are going to hate you regardless of what you say. And they get their self-worth by espousing those feelings on this platform that gives them that dopamine hit of, did I get some reaction either out of the person who sponsored the original content or somebody else inside the Twitter sphere. So I honestly don't really care. I think it's funny, the people who don't like me. It's funny, the people who like me. You just take it in stride. And if you're going to be a personality on one of these platforms, you can't really get too up or down on yourself, depending on what people say.
I like that answer. Something that struck me that I wanted to ask you about, which was already back in 2021, but The Economist ran something. It was like, the four biggest figures in crypto, or the four horsemen of crypto. And it had a cartoon in a car of you, Brian Armstrong, CZ, and Sam Bankman-Fried. And it's like, man, 2 years later, it's pretty interesting to look at, where things stand now. Two of the people in that car, not doing so great this week or this month. I mean, do you think about like who your peers are? I guess when you look at, is it the other people who are most, I guess what's interesting about those four, and people could question having those four be like the four in the illustration, but it was all, people associated with a major centralized exchange.
Right.
But do you think about like who your counterparts are, the company you keep in terms of like online?
I guess I want to read interesting content. I want to read people, regardless of their view, who are very thoughtful about it, who've spent the time to actually research something, who cite other sources, who post interesting charts. Like, I want my content to be read and cited by others. I don't necessarily care what somebody thinks about how I run my exchange. I get a very easy report card of that. It's my trading volume, right? If you trade with us, then our product makes sense. If you don't, then you don't. Like, what The Economist says or any other publication is irrelevant, because none of that points to how much money and how much trading volume goes through BitMEX. So it's kind of like irrelevant.
And then I want to switch to talk about one of your essays in particular, and this is White Boy, the one that you published after everything fell apart at FTX. And I remember reading it and thinking, yeah, kind of shaking my head through it, because I said something really similar to what you said in many, many more words and more eloquently than I did. But I said on this podcast, talking to Dan and another one of our colleagues, Kate, part of the reason that I thought Sam Bankman-Fried was so successful and did kind of, have so many politicians, investors, and just, regular Joe Schmo crypto traders, fawning over him, was because he was the right kind of techie white boy with Ivy League parents. And I just wondered if you've given much thought to if we're ever going to get to the point where we can spot people who fit that archetype and call it out before it happens, like before billions of dollars have been lost. Because damn, wouldn't that have been good?
Yeah, but people did call it out. It's not as if there were not detractors of SBF or there wasn't, warning signs. It's just that everybody stood to make a lot of money if he was successful, regardless of whether you agree with his perspective or not. If you were a TradFi person, you wanted a foothold into crypto, and you wanted, you're a type of person who was in charge of the leading exchange. If you were a crypto person, you thought that Sam had the ear of the regulators globally and he could help push the agenda for crypto, right? So everybody was invested in him being successful, and were willing to, not look too much deeper beneath the surface. I'm sure everybody kind of knew that he was running some sort of like public image game, right? He was just saying all what are supposedly the right things about the global issues that he was supposed to care about, hanging out with the right sort of former politicians at his conferences. He was giving it all to charity and all these sorts of things, right? There wasn't any, it's not like you could say, oh, Sam's a bad guy because he wants to give all his money away to charity. Like, imagine that's the headline that you went out on Twitter with. You're not going to say that, right? You can say, okay, cool. If this is the game he's running, I hope he's not a complete scumbag. He was. But at the end of the day, everybody went along with it because everyone had an invested interest in him being successful.
I mean, he for a while was, and I think we've even done it at some point. He was kind of commonly referred to as just the nicest guy in crypto. In hindsight, do you think that was the red flag? Just that, like, he seemed to just find a way to ingratiate himself with literally anybody he was talking to or dealing with?
No, the red flag was just asking questions, right? Like, if you actually ask people who know about trading, you would know, okay, yes, there's latency arbitrage happening on the exchange. Market makers did not want to trade on FTX because they knew they were getting front run. Like, this stuff was common knowledge. Everybody knew that this exchange was a little bit shady, but it didn't matter, right? Because they were still around, and this is crypto, right? You know, glass houses, throwing stones, all that kind of stuff, right? So again, if you actually spent the time to talk to people who actually knew anything about trading, everyone had their spidey senses. Something might not have been right. Did we think that he was going to blow $8 billion to send money to his hedge fund? No, right? It's just the egregiousness of what he was doing. There's lots of exchanges in crypto in the past that have, done shady stuff and disadvantaged their customers. Did they steal $8 billion? No. And so I guess it's all about the magnitude.
How about the political aspect? I mean, you alluded to it, but to me, one of the biggest ironies of this whole story was that he was, painted as Mr. Washington, and he was the one who was going to advocate on behalf of the industry and actually get lawmakers and politicians, not only educate them on crypto, but, get them to understand that, hey, don't crimp innovation, crypto actually can do good and you should pass a new law. And now it's like, as a reaction to what he allegedly did, they are now over adjusting. And it seems like he's done as much good as people claimed he was doing or was going to do. He's now done that much and more in damage to the whole industry.
Yeah, I think that's not really the irony. The irony is that he wasn't a U.S. business. The majority of the people who got hurt
That too
were not in the United States, even though he spent all his time lobbying politicians in Washington, right? And so I think that's really the disconnect that people need to understand is there's the whole Pax Americana race class stuff, right? But the real thing was, hey, this guy was able to get ingratiated with regimes across the world as, okay, if Bill Clinton and Tony Blair are willing to be on stage with this guy, then maybe I'll give him a license in some jurisdiction, right? But then guess what? The people who really got harmed by this are not people in America. It's people all around the world who are large depositors of FTX. And what's interesting is a lot of the places where he was able to gain favor with regulators are places where traditionally they don't like foreigners, and they don't let the white boy come in there and get a license to do XYZ. It's the local person who's able to get a license to do a particular type of business. So that's what's even more interesting about the whole socioeconomic saga that is FTX and SBF, and what he was able to accomplish outside of America or in traditional places where he just wouldn't have been able to get a seat at the table.
Do you think, there's this really overused and at this point kind of meme phrase that gets thrown around in crypto, like, Bitcoin fixes this, crypto fixes this, all these different things. Does crypto wind up fixing this at all? This idea that, like, yeah, there was something kind of hinky about the exchange. People who were hardcore traders were like, I don't really want to be on FTX. And, it pinged their spidey senses. But, otherwise people were just giving him a pass, like you pointed out. So how does crypto fix this at all? Or can it? Can anything fix this? Like,
it's just human behavior. Crypto
yeah.
doesn't fix any of this. It's just that crypto still exists even after this blatant amount of like malfeasance, right? It's not as if a central bank came in and bailed out every exchange and all the other people who got knocked out because they had exposure to FTX. That's not what happened. The great part about crypto, and the unfortunate part for anyone who's on the losing side of this, is that the market cleared very quickly. A person who ran a very highly leveraged business model to the price of Bitcoin and other shitcoins was cleaned out because the market was a free trading market. It wasn't protected. He wasn't, oh shit, Sam Bankman-Fried's going bankrupt. Guess what? Close the exchange, print the money. Banks are shut for the weekend. We got to prop up this significant industry player and make sure, and everyone else get in the room. Someone's bailing this guy out, right? That's how the system we're trying to replace operates. That's what happened with Credit Suisse and UBS. Sam was allowed to fail,
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that hurt a lot of people, but that was the right response to what happened, because it cleansed the system. And now we're 100% up from where we were when that failure happened, right? In the span of less than 6 months. So we take the pain, we move forward, and we make adjustments. That's what crypto's about.
Since we're talking about the kind of legal and regulatory treatment right now in crypto's rep, and I know you don't want to get too into your own legal past, but I guess big picture, Arthur, when you look at what's happening in terms of regulation, the U.S. versus other countries, what do you see happening and playing out? Because we are right now seeing a lot of countries basically say, well, companies, I should say, we just won't operate in the U.S. because it's too unclear to us how to avoid the issues here.
I'll take it even a level higher than the US, because this isn't just a US thing. If you think about the global fiat system, we've piled on, what is it, like 200 or 300% of global GDP in terms of debt over the last 50 years, right? How do you repay debt? You outright default, or you inflate and default. And so inflate and default is the easier option because it's not as blatant, and the politician can decide the speed and the contours of who essentially pays for the malinvestments that happen. And so if you think about it, the speed and the pace of the assignment of the losses for this debt that is not productive can only happen at a slow and gradual pace if those who have capital in the system are not allowed to leave. And so if you think about it in that perspective, what is crypto and gold and any other thing that isn't a liability on a traditional financial services in the company's balance sheet? That's the way to get out. That's the way that your capital isn't subject to inflation, and you don't want to be there. We've seen what happens. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, United States from 1941 to 1952, when yield curve control is in place, Japan, and 1989 until the present, right? These are all places where financial repression was enacted because there was too much debt. And instead of having a quick and dirty financial crisis like we had in the 1930s in the United States, we decided to extend and pretend, and we're going to inflate it away and dink people, but it's going to be more pleasant, right? And so if you don't want to be part of that cohort that's getting your capital eviscerated over the next coming decades, then you're buying crypto, you're buying gold, you're buying hard assets, right? You're buying businesses with no debt, right? So, and this is the way that you get out of that situation. And so if you think about it, I'm someone who has to allocate these losses. I want the denominator to be as large as possible. I can't have everyone going to this crypto thing and getting out of the way of this inflation that I have to put on the backs of the entire world to pay for all this bad debt that we've accumulated over the last 50 years. And so put that in context when you think about XYZ regulator or country saying, oh, crypto's bad, it's evil, it's not ESG, it's not this, it's a scam, blah, 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 right? You can repeat the mantras. Or, hey, we don't want you to have crypto in your own private wallet, keep it on the exchange, don't withdraw it. Oh, we want to have ETFs and we're going to keep them in the hands of the traditional players who are just going to custody that crypto. And if we need to, inflate, tax them, we'll just do it. There goes your crypto, right? So this is what's happening around the world. It's not just a United States thing. And so people need to understand the bigger game that's being played, and not to personify it with it's a US thing or a China thing or a Europe thing or whatever, right? That just gets you mired down into the politics, which is not really the game. Everybody has the same problem. I don't care if you're capitalist or you're communist. Everybody put on a lot of debt. We've passed the point where that debt has become useful, and therefore everyone is going to take an L unless they get some crypto or some gold, some hard asset that's outside of the traditional banking system.
There's a few different things that I think are really interesting that I want to kind of come back to. So, like, we've heard people kind of bemoan like how quickly people can spin up a new project in crypto and then it gets really big and then it fails quickly. It sounds like you're saying that that's a feature, not a bug. Like, it is in the long run, probably we're seeing fewer people actually be impacted by some of these huge blowups because they get so big and then they collapse so quickly. So at least, the market has kind of cleansed itself of like these projects that ultimately shouldn't have been in the first place. Do I have that right?
Yeah, similar to like every single new piece of technology has this similar sort of, life cycle. Think about railroads back in the mid 19th century. How many different railroad companies were there? There were hundreds, maybe thousands of these companies, all building the same lines going everywhere. Complete clusterfuck. There was charlatan promoters promoting railroad stocks, pump and dumps. If you want to take a look at financial crisis caused by new technology, the banking crisis of 1873 in the United States, 1906, like these are all predicated on new forms of technology. People rushed into them. There was all these different companies created out of thin air very, very quickly. A lot of them were dubious quality. They all came crashing back down. The unfortunate part about the traditional setup of the world economy today is that irrespective of the economic ism that is practiced in your particular jurisdiction, nobody wants to assign any losses to anyone. And so we're unwilling to allow companies to fail, especially if they've donated to my political party or they've been very supportive of my rise to power. And so we're not letting the system cleanse itself. Would there have been such an impetus to create Bitcoin if we didn't have the 2008 global financial crisis? Probably not, right? So everything's a reaction to this fact that as a globe, we've decided we don't want to have any more pain. Everything is up only. And the problem with that is you don't get any change. And everything that we have here today, these video cameras, this internet, it's all due to change. And that change was disruptive. And every single time there's going to be failures.
So what do you think about some of the really big traditional financial institutions getting involved in crypto? Like you mentioned some of the ETFs before, and there is this big ongoing fight. Like Grayscale really wants to get a spot Bitcoin ETF approved. They want to convert GBTC. And, that's been an ongoing fight. And there are some people in crypto who think, okay, we've got to play nice. We've got to like make room for them. We've got to let the big traditional players come in. And this is how we get to legitimacy. This is how we, bring in the next billion people. It sounds like you're maybe not as welcoming as that. So I want to ask about that.
So the great thing about crypto is that the way that the technology was funded was at a grassroots level rather than like a top-down level, right? It's not as if the richest people in the world are the ones who owned the first Bitcoin or mined the first Bitcoin. It's just random people, right? And so we have this ecosystem. Yes, there is a highly concentration of whales who have, 10,000 or more Bitcoin or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's just individual people saw the premise, saw there was value there, invested their time and money and power, and they own crypto, as opposed to I'm politically connected, therefore I'm allowed a seat at the table to invest in this new technology. And so I think that's extremely powerful, because if this is the people's money that is only valuable because we have a network of computers of the people to validate transactions, then the people should own it. And that doesn't mean that, a large traffic corporation should be barred from buying Bitcoin. Absolutely not. If you want to go market buy $1 billion Bitcoin, please do. Like, I want that shit to go up, right? But do we need to like compromise on the principles and ethos of the ecosystem to let in this player who didn't believe in this in the first place? No, we don't need to. If they want to buy it, they can buy it. If they want to launch an ETF, launch an ETF. If you want to launch a custodial solution in your own financial institution, launch it, right? That's the whole point. Anyone can participate. We shouldn't have this ethos of banning people. But at the same token, we shouldn't say that we need to compromise on what we're trying to achieve, which is a new form of networking with the people rather than a trusted centralized counterparty, and create value that way. That is what I have a problem with.
Of course, there are people who've been in crypto since the beginning who think the very idea of big banks getting in any way, shape, or form, which is happening, is kind of silly, like defeats the whole purpose of, what we're doing here. That clash has always been interesting to me between the degens and the OG types, many of them libertarians, not all, but now the people who in the last 3 years, and again, that's why I brought up the pandemic. I feel like that was this, all of a sudden the funnel got really fat of like people rushing in. Last episode, we just had Anthony Scaramucci on. He's definitely from that world of already rich Wall Street investors who got into crypto purely as an investment, and he's not on Uniswap, swapping coins, and he's not collecting NFTs or sending Bitcoin to a relative in another country and praising it for that purpose. It's like it's an investment case. Do you see that sort of tension between those camps increasing, or it doesn't matter? It can be everyone into the tent.
Tension is great because it says, again, everyone's money, right? So everyone should have a voice. If Scaramucci wants a particular, Bitcoin improvement protocol champion, he should do it, right? That's the whole point. Everyone should be able to participate to the extent that they'd like to. And so I think to say that this certain type of person should not be allowed in Bitcoin is antithetical to what we're trying to do here.
The other point I wanted to kind of jump to is, we've got incumbent centralized players in crypto. And, kind of to Dan's point, there are some people who think there shouldn't be centralized players, or that they shouldn't have too, kind of like an outsized influence or say in how things continue to develop. So who do you see as the top centralized exchanges or players right now? And just how do you feel about, them getting stronger or winding up having like an outsized say in some of the things that happen in crypto?
Well, I think the issue isn't really like them having an outside say. It's the average person doesn't actually care about decentralization or centralization. They want a good product. So they want, an easy product to use and this and that and the other. They don't really care if using a Sparrow wallet versus using, BitGo is a better solution, or trading on BitMEX or trading on another decentralized exchange is the better way to go from a decentralization point of view. They don't care about that, right? Good price, good product, good user experience. That's all the majority of people care about and will care about in the future. And so, the centralized exchanges and the centralized players play an important role in that they offer people, the crypto light solution. If you want to participate, you don't really want to go full into exactly what this is all about. Yes, you can hold your crypto on a centralized player, or you can use one of these services. If you want to actually become your own financial institution and take control of the destiny of your finances, that's there for you to do too. At this point, it's harder to use. Hopefully there's more people working on solutions that make that easier to use, so that competition is a little bit more fair. But at the end of the day, I think that's the average person doesn't care about any centralization or centralization. However, they do care that they, over the weekend, they thought their bank deposit wasn't going to be made full if they were, SVB or signature depositor. And they're like, okay, well, what is this? Is there something to this Bitcoin thing that people are talking about? And then we said, okay, well, yeah, you can use a centralized wallet. You can use a decentralized wallet. You can buy it this way or that way. And that sparks the conversation.
I'm glad you said that about, how difficult it is to use it versus like crypto light. I wanted to ask you about that. It seems to me that for all the raving that crypto true believers do about DeFi, it's still, way too hard to use for a regular person. Even people who are not completely tech clueless, like you're basically saying you got to get your MetaMask wallet and then do these 4 steps. And it's just too much for most people. I mean, after FTX collapsed, all the DeFi fanatics were saying, see, this is why you don't put your money on a centralized exchange. And it was like, okay, but centralized exchanges aren't going away as a thing. I mean, as you said, you nailed it. It's like for the average person, if they've heard a little bit about Bitcoin and they want to get into it, Coinbase is good enough. Like they'll do it for me. They don't care when you say, well, you really shouldn't keep your crypto on the exchange. Do you see this changing in the next few years with the UX of real DeFi tools getting much better? Because it seems to me it's going to be a long road to get the average person to have a crypto wallet that they manage.
Yeah, I mean, we might never even get there, to be honest, right? And that might still be okay, right? Because then not everyone is at the same place in their desire to run their own finances. Most people don't want anything to do with running their finances. They want to, have meaningful work, save some money, be able to provide for their family. The fact that they now have to speculate in crypto and gold and property and this and that and stocks and bonds and blah, blah, blah. Like, what the fuck, man? Why can't I just hold something and I don't have to worry about this shit, right? Now, if we can make it that easier where somebody just gets to hold it and not worry about this shit, then they'll use whatever solution is out there, whether it's centralized or decentralized. Because the problem with this inflation that is rampant in the world is that we create speculators out of everyone. Because everyone is worried about, I have a job, I know I'm not going to get a raise to meet the cost of living. Therefore, with whatever savings I have, I need to be a degen on the stock market and NFTs and Dogecoin and whatever, right? It doesn't really matter what it is. And people don't want to do that. that's like most people don't want anything to do with finance, unfortunately.
How far out do you think we are from, having a really viable crypto light product? Or do you think we're there already?
I have no idea. It's
Yeah.
again, it's really, I think you need demand, right? So depending on how this banking crisis, unfolds, I have my thesis. But at the end of the day, like, how painful is this inflation that people are going to have to go through? How much is it really going to change their, how they structure their lives? And that will determine how fast we get a, very, very well used decentralized crypto product or not. Because at the end of the day, if it's just people like me and us who want to use some decentralized product, that's great. Thank you very much for, developing something, in an open source manner. But again, it's not going to pay the bills.
It has long seemed like, at least in terms of centralized exchanges, that this is Binance's to lose. I'm curious to see, and I know we're going back to kind of something we tried to ask you about before, but like, who's the top exchange right now, like for you?
I mean,
And
obviously,
this is not just based off volume. Yeah.
well, it is. Everything is based on value. Off of
Okay.
volume. I think that's the only objective metric that you can go on. And
So then, can it only be Binance at the top right now?
Well, it could be anyone. There's been a lot of exchanges that have worn the crown for a while, and it's a very heavy crown. CZ's wearing it right now. We'll see how long he keeps it on his head. And yeah, it's Binance's race to lose because they have, what is that? I don't know, 75, 80% market share in terms of most products. And so it depends what the customers want, what he wants to develop for his exchange. And so obviously everyone's gunning for him. Everyone wants to do an improvement, create new white space in the exchange space to offer something new for clients. And we'll see what happens.
Let's talk a little bit about NFTs, Arthur. We've mostly been doing crypto as a hard asset, a financial asset. Talk to us a little bit about the culture. I was looking up your Twitter and I see you with your ordinals, your Taproot Wizards NFT. You're getting into it. So it is funny to me. I mean, as you can tell, I love framing things in terms of like the camps within crypto. But there's, for the longest time, it was like, well, NFTs are an ETH thing and Bitcoiners don't touch that. But that is changing.
Yeah, I think in my view, NFTs is a data construct, and it's a data construct that allows us to trade human culture. And everything we do other than, eat, sleep, eating and sleeping is culture, right? It's sports. It's going to a nice restaurant. It's looking at art. It's listening to music. So NFTs is like, how do I make this scarce? How do I make this tradable? How do I give money back to the creators? And so this is probably, I think, one of the biggest movements or applications of this cryptographic and money technology that we're building. It's unlocking the potential of the long tail of human culture and letting everybody participate, everybody trade it, getting away from these centralized platforms, these big Web2 platforms that sort of gate content and tell you how you need to comport yourself on the internet, what we like and what we don't like, right? Why do they tell me what's a valid tweet, what's not a valid tweet, right? Why is Elon's purview to say that? So that is why I think NFTs is going to be a massive movement. The first expression of this is always the crudest form, right? So like, remember, obviously I wasn't alive, but people bemoan the fact that, actors and actresses would start to talk in movies, or that there was color, right? This was considered, vulgar and just not to be done. And yet today we have people who would rather go to Gagosian art exhibit and say art is meant to be on the wall. This person didn't go to Pace. Why, who's collecting these JPEG, whatever the fuck you call them, right? And they just snub their nose that this isn't art. This is merchandise, right? And so that to me tells me this is exactly where I want to be, because that is art. That's pushing the culture forward of what we consider proper expression of humanity. And this is the digital format in which we can trade it and value it. And that's why I think the NFTs and whatever comes out of it is going to be huge. Obviously, we had Ethereum was the first manifestation of this. Now you have ordinal theory, which, I find a lot of value in because it's actually unique. It's not just a pointer to some centralized database, maybe IPFS or Filecoin or whatever, right? And so every camp is going to have their take on it. And that's what's super interesting, is because it's everyone's culture to experience on the internet.
Again, with NFTs, like we've seen so many big brands come in and kind of try to make a run at this thing. I see Dan, this is on the podcast, so I'm just going to say aloud. I see Dan smiling because I know we've both seen lots of big,
Pepsi microphones.
yeah,
Like
or
just-
like, and I hate to start naming
just
names, but
trash.
like the Macy's Thanksgiving's Day Parade collection, I wound up writing that one, and they had all the NFTs of like the balloons, and like it's been really interesting seeing the community be able to identify a collection that's coming from someone who really doesn't care about the significance of it. They're just trying to jump in and like get their feet wet. So I am curious to know, like, when was the turning point for you when you thought, okay, yeah, NFT, like there's real value here?
Trading volumes, like, obviously trading volumes exploded on OpenSea back in, was it August in 2021, I think it was. And then you just saw the different types of people who, went to a crypto conference you would never see before, right? Would you ever expect XYZ celebrity or brand would figure out how to deal with Ethereum, get their customers to use a MetaMask or some other sort of wallet to buy this item, right? Before, crypto was this thing, we don't touch it, we don't know how to deal with it, our auditors hate it, our banks hate it, but now it's, fuck, I can sell this digital content, like, no friction. I don't have to go through my traditional distributors. I just have to like communicate with my followers on some platform and tell them to buy or sell this thing. I'm in, right? And of course they're in. If the young generation says, this is how I want to be, this is how I want to consume culture, then the brands have to be there. And it's going to be very clunky. It's going to be very ugly. It's going to be very, just bad at first before they understand, okay, this is the market I'm trying to target. This is how they want to consume this culture. And, I need to put this type of effort into it. No one knows. They say, okay, NFT, slap it on, OpenSea, and I did an NFT project, and then somebody got a promotion, right? That's probably what happened to a lot of these companies. And, as they start to get shit from people like us, like that was complete dog shit, they're going to start to refine that view. And people are going to say, well, you got to really create a community. You should have had a Discord channel. And, these type of people like this particular chain and blah, 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 right? And so you get nuance. But obviously the first stuff is going to be trash. It's just going to be, okay, if CryptoPunks sold if there's an alien punk that sold for $3 million, fuck. And that all it is just a JPEG. Let me create one too. I should be able to make one for $100,000, right? And that's not how art's made.
Yeah, I know you like your rare Pepes, and that's like a
Absolutely.
great example of something that actually has history once you read about it and you understand where it came from. It's pretty cool. Man, this has been so much fun. We don't want to keep you too long, but as we start to wrap up, to circle back to the beginning when we were talking about writing, and I just so appreciate what you're saying about, wanting to actually read good stuff. What are you reading lately? You mentioned the book about, a plague long ago. What are some of the books you've been getting into?
I recently spent the long weekend in Penang, Malaysia, because I love to eat street food. And so reading history of Malaysia. I didn't really know much about the place. Very interesting. I like to learn about the places where I live and spend a lot of time. And I think it gives you a lot of context of why people feel the way they do even today, right? A few hundred years ago is not, obviously it's a long time, but it's not that long of a time ago. We still harbor the grudges and, feel the injustices of many hundreds and many thousands of years ago. So if you go to a place you don't really understand the history, then you're not really going to understand why people feel the way they do. And so, yeah, that's one interesting book that I'm reading right now. I'm reading another book about World War II, very detailed. It's shocking how destructive war is, and I think everyone should read the book. You don't have, if you want to read it from a perspective of your particular jurisdiction, go ahead. It's not going to be pretty. I don't care if you're on whichever side you're on. War is a destructive and terrible thing, and I think people need to read about how it was like, 80 years ago, to make sure that they don't, enable politicians to push for solutions that militarily escalate things. So,
no fiction.
Not recently. I haven't. I'm always on the lookout for good sci-fi. So, if you have any recommendations, happy to hear them. But yeah, nothing's tickled my fancy right now as of yet. Recently.
See, now I'm thinking about the good sci-fi I've read recently. Have you tried the Broken Earth trilogy?
I've heard about this. I haven't read that.
It's really, really good. They're very long books, but I absolutely recommend it. I think they're trying to make it into a series. But yeah, I was also interested that you didn't mention any fiction, but yeah, there's some really good stuff out there. Oh, also I think it's Red Leopard, Black
Oh yeah,
Wolf.
Marlon James.
Yeah. I think they're also doing a show with that. Those are my two recommendations.
Awesome. Thank you.
The other thing I was going to ask, and you mentioned this really early on when we started recording, was that you don't just want to read like really quick kind of like, fast food kind of media content. You want to read stuff that's been really deeply researched. Where do you wind up doing your research? Like who else is, putting good stuff out there that you read when you want to kind of learn about markets and kind of build the thesis that you're going to put out there on your blog?
Yes, obviously I'm a big acolyte of Felix Zulauf. I read his work. Danielle DiMartino Booth at Quill Intelligence. He publishes great stuff. Jim Bianco, he's very entertaining to listen to, and his stuff is very good. I'm a subscriber of Ned Davis Research, very OGs in the global macro space. And then, me and my friends trade publications around, right? We talk about this stuff. It's something that really interests us. And so, if a particular strategy, so the bank puts out something interesting, then we'll forward it around and we'll discuss it. So it's something that I like doing, and it's fun, and it's, very intellectual, and obviously you want to be right and make money, which makes it so you get a yardstick for your ideas, which is fun. And so, yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff. Maybe we should also just put out this whole episode as a Medium post to fit your thesis about reading it in text. Great stuff. Arthur, thanks so much for coming on.
This has been awesome. Thank you.